It's my first time being an interviewer, so
You're doing
uh,
great.
So sometimes you get it right, and sometimes the other thing happens. This is one of those cases. So unfortunately, I had reviewed the preprint of Dr. Eric Helms' study. So I thought the right thing to do and the most efficient thing to do to get the information to you, the viewer, would be to bring Dr. Helms on the channel. Now, you might be thinking, oh, is this just 2 hours of him browbeating you for messing up interpreting his study? No, it's about, I don't know, 20 or 30 minutes of that. But we also get into a ton of other topics. Him recently becoming a professional natural bodybuilder. We get into natural versus enhanced lifting. We get into his recommendations for bulking. We get into the misuse of science. We get into anecdotal versus scientific evidence. We get into a ton of topics. Big thank you to Dr. Helms for being very, very gracious and generous with his time. And I hope you enjoy the video. And now, dear friends, I'm just trying to be like Lex Friedman, Dr. Eric Helms.
so welcome to the show, Dr. Eric Helms, pro bodybuilder. Recently got his pro card, big deal there. So could you sort of walk us through the process of your season competing this year, and then maybe also touch on previous years, your competitions, and sort of what you learned from each year during the past decade or more of competing as a natural bodybuilder?
Yeah, man. No, thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure. Big fan of your content, so I'm excited to talk to you about all this. Um, yeah, man. So my very first season was 2007, and I competed in '07, 2009, and 2011. And that's when I moved the year after that overseas to New Zealand, where I did my research-based degrees and took time off so I could focus on that from bodybuilding competition. I was doing a lot of powerlifting, weightlifting, strongman. And then I got back on stage in 2019 after graduating with my PhD in 2017. So I had like a 2018 off season, very focused on bodybuilding. And then I was probably going to compete more like closer to 2021 or 2022, but obviously COVID. So I ended up just going, you know what? I turned 40 in 2023. So let's compete the year I turned 40 and take a real run at seeing if I can finally get that coveted WNBF pro card. So I know your listeners aren't necessarily all huge natural bodybuilding like advocates or fans. So just to kind of give them an idea, there's a lot of different natural bodybuilding federations, but the biggest one, especially with the largest international presence that's truly global, is the World Natural Bodybuilding Federation. There's over 50 plus international affiliates, and WNBF Worlds is arguably the only true like world championship where you actually get people from all over the world competing. And the pro division in WNBF Worlds is arguably the most competitive drug-free stage that a natural competitor can compete on. The WNBF is probably in the top echelon of who takes their natural status most seriously. It's not just lip service. Like to get on stage, you have to take a polygraph, which, you know, say what you will about it, but I think it's a signal, and it's also a deterrent. It's not just like, yeah, we urine test 1% of people sometimes, you know. So it's a 10-year drug-free organization. You have to take a polygraph to get on stage with the polygrapher. And having actually been in the U.S. Air Force back in my young age and having a security clearance, I know what like a legit polygraph is like. And it's not quite the 2 hour, I want to make sure you're not in debt and selling, you know, secrets to Russia level of DoD type of polygraph, but it's still like a significant 20 to 30 minute discussion around your history and making sure that you meet the banned substance list criteria for 10 years. If you pass that, you can get on stage, and then in the amateurs, if you win pro status, then you're urine tested, and in the pros, if you win money, you're then urine tested as well. And there is some out of competition urine testing that's still kind of a burgeoning thing because there's not a lot of money and it's quite expensive to do like random off-season or even targeted off-season testing. So anyway, that's the WNBF. And in my competitions over the various years, you know, in '07, I was a relatively young man. I'd only started lifting in '04, and I had some, you know, big dreams, and they were I'll just say that they were tempered by my experiences seeing what was out there. My first season competing to get a WNBF Pro card was '09, and I did a series of shows with the INBF, and I got into, which is the amateur affiliate in the States, I got into 2 overalls, and I also placed second to the guy who went on to the overall to win his pro card. So I thought, oh, I'm really, really close. But that was, 14 years ago. So it has been a long time coming from me. And I think a lot of the things I've learned are patience and to put my head down and keep doing work, despite the fact that I have a fair amount of insecurity around, am I really built to be a pro bodybuilder? Am I kind of too narrow? Do I not have the right structure? Am I, I'm 6 foot and I'm only competing at like 175 pounds. Am I big enough? All those voices of doubt can easily make you kind of give up if you don't have the right mindset. But I've also seen that some of the best natural bodybuilders on the planet, they're in their late 30s, 40s, and even sometimes early 50s. Like Geoff Alberts, who just placed 5th out of 16 in the most competitive of the 3 pro classes, was at his best ever. Not best ever at 52, but best ever. And this is someone who started lifting as a teenager. So does that mean he necessarily put on a crap ton of muscle mass in the last 10 years, or is just the best combination of peaking proportions, leanness, etc.? But I think the point is for us competitors, it's not about being my biggest and what's my estimated body fat percentage and mass, but did I look the best on stage that year? So anyway, patience is what I learned, perseverance is what I learned, and to be experimental and to really treat myself as an N of 1 kind of experiment, to bring in my mindset as a researcher, and really just kind of trying to figure out how to apply some of the big picture principles to me as an individual has been the process. And that really competitive bodybuilding needs to be a lifestyle if you want it to be sustainable and a positive thing in your life, rather than something that can really detract from it or make you feel restricted, or just that one thing I did that crazy year in college type of approach. So that's a high level answer to that question, but obviously there's a ton I've learned over the years.
Yeah, I mean, Geoff Alberts looked great, and it was even just a couple of years ago where he was, maybe not as on track. He actually called himself out where he was not maybe like doing all the finer things and the details, that he used to do. But yeah, he looked phenomenal. Definitely the best that I've seen him. I followed his journey as well, for a number of years, and yours probably, about since I started lifting, 8-9 years ago. And I think it's one of those things where we're always our own biggest critics, and having encouraging people around you saying like, maybe being objective, maybe being positive, maybe a mixture of those two at different points can be super helpful and useful. What do you say to people who say stuff like there's no such thing as natural bodybuilding, or like, oh, like they have incentive to cheat and so therefore they're all cheating, or like half the guys on stage are actually secretly juicing it up? Because when I talk to natural competitors, they're never calling each other out. It's always people outside who don't really have any experience competing, or often it's the guys who actually went down the enhanced road but weren't that good who seem to call out the natural competitions. So I guess, what are your thoughts on, is natural bodybuilding actually a thing? Is everyone secretly, the week before competition still, juicing it up, or what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, man. The funny thing you're mentioning is people on the other side of the fence. I often don't even find that it's people on the other side of the fence that often. It's like people who are interested or kind of like adjacent to the enhanced community. And another funny thing I notice is it's almost never enhanced competitors who are calling out all of the natural competitors, because they remember being drug-free. They remember when they were competing natural many times before they went over to the other side. And for them, it was sometimes a calculated step, and there's some really interesting examples out there too. So for example, Sean Clarita, who, just lost his 212 title, he placed second. He's still an incredible, enhanced bodybuilder. Or Kai Green, arguably an uncrowned Mr. Olympia. Both of those guys were WNBF pros back in the day. Sean Clarita won the lightweight world title multiple times, but never could quite cinch the overall. He had some epic battles with Brian Whitaker back in the day. And Kai Green, by the time he turned 19, he had won multiple WNBF pro shows. And then for those who were paying attention, he went on to compete in what was back then called the Team Universe, which is one of the few drug-tested NPC shows. And so the difference between once he actually went IFBB pro and then started competing at the Olympia versus that is like a difference of, I think, 75 pounds on stage. And Sean Clarita, I think considering, Sean, it's like a similar proportion in amount, but he's like 5'1". So, yeah, he would compete in like the low 130s, and now he competes in the low 170s. So it's like 40 pounds.
Yeah. It's
yeah.
The natural bodybuilder is, I mean, there's an idea that, if someone is good at this, of course they go enhanced. It's just like what happens. And I think maybe at some points in time that was true, but I think if you look at some examples like that, the best of the best naturally are considering, you don't know exactly the response to the drugs,
True.
but some, the best naturals are probably going to be at least competitive as enhanced lifters, at a very minimum, for sure.
Yeah, so I think that's one interesting thing to consider, because like if I was to sit here and explain why I do think natural bodybuilding is alive and well and perfectly fine, and the people within the sport, we have concerns, but they're typically not very present in the polygraph and urine tested, like serious larger organizations. I think the cheating is a lot more rampant in organizations that don't create a culture of seriousness around being drug-free. I'm going to put on my nerdy hat. There's actually some pretty cool qualitative, published, peer-reviewed interviews with athletes who have admitted to doping violations. And one of those athletes, it's a qualitative study that came out of Australia, is a bodybuilder. And he is talking about how, well, in my organization, everyone's cheating, and I know they are, so I cheat as well. And the funny thing is that I won't say it on the channel because I'm not trying to, this is something that happened in 2014. It may be different now. I think when the paper came out, I could be misremembering. But the specific organization that bodybuilder competed in, I know for a fact, because I know some people who competed in it, they didn't do any drug testing that whole year. So you can have the word natural in your organization, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're sending a social signal to the competitors that you're serious about it. So if someone wants their grandmother to come and support them, and they're actually on, a bit of a cycle, and that it's kind of like natural wink, wink, nudge, nudge, that organization, it's a more level playing field than, say, the NPC or the IFBB Pro League. And it's probably the majority of people who are drug-free, but it might be something legitimately like 20% of them who maybe don't meet the strict criteria of the natural banned substance list. And while that's still not what I think some of the people on the internet think, like they're all cheaters, which is just kind of a wild worldview to have, like when there's also there's a federation where you can openly use drugs. And I think it's, when someone thinks like literally 80-90% or all of the natural bodybuilders are cheating, that to me says a lot more about their worldview and maybe their cynicism and where they're at in life, which is almost sad, than it does anything about the reality. I think it's just as preposterous as someone to say like everyone in drug-free bodybuilding is 100% drug-free. Because I mean, realistically, like there's not any incentives to cheat. I mean, there's not strong incentives to cheat. Let's put it that way. Like I have to pay my own polygraph fee. I have to pay an entry fee. I'm flying all over the world, and there's no money in natural bodybuilding. Like if you win every single world title, you're getting like 10 grand. But then you spent like 12 grand traveling and registering and paying for tans and photos. So it's only marginally like more expensive to buy drugs at that point, right? So being a drug-free competitor is you certainly don't do it for the accolades. And another interesting thing is like we're very aware of some of the natural bodybuilders who have a social media presence. Like you can think of your Matt Oguses, you can think of your Jeff Nippards, he's a WNBF pro, and you think, oh, they used that to launch their career, but did they? And for every one of them, there's like 50 natural bodybuilders who barely even know how to use Instagram. So to me, they're much more kind of like the solitary monk almost is their personality, and a lot of them don't even put themselves out there that much. Like they're individual athletes who are far more interested in pursuing it for the love of the game, if you will, rather than self promotion. And you'll see a lot more people who are interested in self promotion going the NPC IFBB route because it's bigger. And not all of them. There's plenty of those guys and gals who are just not that interested in it. So anyway, I don't think the reward structure is really there. Most people in natural bodybuilding are not necessarily doing it for that. But I will say, if the natural quote unquote organization is not serious about being natural, it's not that the testing is not high enough quality. It's that you're going to get more people who think it's okay to use drugs and not really follow the rules because the rules are just rules, entering those competitions than you will in organizations where they really will drug test you. And I'll tell you something, I can back that up with evidence. So in Australia, this is the WNBF affiliate kind of petered out, existed for a while, then went away, and now it just came back in force, and we have a really strong WNBF Australia affiliate now. And this is only the second year we've had a WNBF New Zealand affiliate. And I'm actually involved in the organizational level in WNBF New Zealand. I judged last year, and I know the president of both of those organizations personally. And they specifically told me that once they sent out the banned substance list and all the requirements and the waiver and the scheduling for the polygraph and said, hey, this is legit, like let's schedule our polygraphs. Once people had to respond and schedule their spot for the polygraphs, which they do for like 2 or 3 days prior to the show, there was a lot of dropouts. So there was over, I want to say there was nearly 50 competitors signed up for the New Zealand show, and 15 or close to 15 dropped out once that email got sent out. And then Australia hit over 100 a few months out and then dropped down to 80 and then bounced back up to 90. So we're talking 10, 20% of the people who registered for the show went, oh, like natural, gotcha. And I also don't think many of them are trying to cheat. I think a lot of them are just not aware that something like SARMs or a certain pre-workout or a certain compound that you can get at a supplement store that's actually hormonal is banned. Or they didn't realize that it's a 10-year drug-free rule. Like, oh shit, actually, I used ephedrine in like 7 years ago, that's a bad example because that one has I think a shorter ban time. But I used a prohormone 6-7 years ago or something like that. I think that happens a lot, and people don't really think about it until they actually see that in front of them. And then the final point I would say is that not all organizations have the same years drug-free or banned substance lists. So there may be plenty of people who are natural based on the criteria of the organization they're competing in. But like, for example, the IFBB or NPC drug tested shows it's only a 3-year requirement. So you might have someone who, theoretically is benefiting from, and I don't think there's actually good evidence for this over a certain time frame, prior usage, or certain things aren't banned. It's more of just like, are you clean in your urine test type of deal. So it's I think some people just look at that and go, that's too messy. I think natural bodybuilding is bullshit. For a competitor, though, we're just looking for what's a reasonable level playing field and where do I think that I could be competitive, and I know where I'm good. So I find the INBF, WNBF to be like the best combination of those factors where it creates a real serious social attitude. So there's few people who can look themselves in the mirror and want to cheat. And they do have as robust testing as you can have. And people do fail or get screened out or self-screen themselves, like in the example that I just gave. And more importantly, like the physiques that you see on stage tend to fall within a certain bracket. And of course it's super subjective, and it's just as subjective as the guy in the comments who's like, oh, look at those delts, he's not natty. But that's it. A long-winded answer to basically saying I don't think in serious big organizations that use the full spectrum of testing and have a culture where everyone actually wants it to be drug-free have a cheating issue. I would say in the WNBF, INBF, like less than 1%. But I will say that in other organizations that are not like that, it may be as high as something like 20%, which when you see that in action, or if you're surrounded by that, and it's like literally 1 or 2 out of every 10 competitors who might actually be trying to cheat the system, I can understand why some people have a view that the natural bodybuilding is defunct. And I remember, this will be the last comment I make, dude, because I know you have other questions. But I remember back when like the NPC Team Universe was big, and it was very much considered like a drug tested show, not a natural show, because you can get an IFBB Pro card there. And I think there's some of that now with like the Ben Weider comp. And I'm not saying there's not a lot of natural guys who do that show, but I know there are a lot of people when it's a pathway to an IFBB Pro card, where you're now going to compete against IFBB pros who are not tested, and it's not tested in the pro ranks. Unless you just want to finish your kind of natural career by getting an IFBB Pro card and saying, hey, I did it drug free. If you want to compete and you see that as a pathway, and maybe you see it as a viable pathway that might be easier if you can sneak by the rules, I do think there's more incentive to cheat there. And some of the people involved in the NPC and IFBB, they don't view that as true natural competition, but they actually view things like the WNBF differently. So yeah, so to anyone who's critical, feel free. I'm not trying to change your mind, but when IFBB pros and NPC competitors reach out to me and say, hey, congratulations, nice job, not, hey, you effing cheater, like this is bullshit, it should tell you something. That means you think you know more about the natural bodybuilding scene than the natural bodybuilders who are involved in it, and more than people who take incredible amounts of anabolic steroids and are heavily involved in drug culture and bodybuilding. So if you think that your opinion should be elevated above both of those groups, then I don't know what to tell you. It's a pretty arrogant position, and more power to you.
The internet, that's the internet.
Yep.
I've definitely seen some federations where I would kind of consider them to be natty light. Like they're sort of natural in theory, kind of, but not in practice. And I think that's actually reflected in the physiques. I mean, you can just, you can see that there is a level of not even conditioning. I would say just size.
Yep.
Naturals can get very, very lean. I mean, that's a myth that I've heard before. Like, oh, if you're shredded, then you're not natural. You can get shredded as a natural. It just takes longer. You have to pencil in a good few months, like half a year probably, to get truly peeled for most people. Maybe some people, if they're naturally leaner, they can do it in 3 or 4 months or something. But generally, you've got your work cut out for you, compared to, I guess, some enhanced lifters. I've heard some enhanced lifters say that dieting is just easier and faster when you're enhanced. You can go harder. You don't have to worry about muscle loss, etc.
But conversely, just real briefly, I've also heard guys who are typically in the open division, not necessarily classic or at the amateur level, but who are running a lot of different compounds that causes a lot of levels of water retention. Like Mike Israetel actually recently talked about this on Culture. He was like, it's really hard to get natty dry, So like it's actually like they're like, listen, it's easier to display your leanness when you're not managing all of the crazy water retention and hormonal nonsense that's going on when you're running, DNP, anabolic androgenic steroids, growth hormone, and then trying to counteract it with diuretics, not trying to overdo it. So there's actually I've heard that too. Like people are like, well, you look leaner than the IFBB Pro, so you must be on gear. And that's a really illogical statement. It makes zero sense. You just have to think for like 3 seconds. Like, wait, but they are on gear, you moron. But even so, the like that should actually tell you something, And so people who are running a lot of ancillaries apparently have even more challenge just kind of having the look of being lean, even if they are actually lean, because peaking becomes more complicated. So, yeah.
And I know Mike has had his struggles with water retention before. And, once he got the water retention and the peaking figured out, like, night and day difference in his physique. So I think there are just more moving parts when it comes to the enhanced side of things. Like you have the training, which is still important, and then you have the dieting, still important, but then you have this other layer of stuff. I mean, I get some athletes coming to me for coaching. I'm just like, well, I just don't. I don't feel like, even if I'm just doing the training side of things, I think at a certain point there are enough differences that it's just not really worth dealing with. So it's one of those things where there are significant differences the more enhanced someone gets.
Yep.
For some of these natty light guys, maybe the training doesn't change appreciably, but when you start getting people who are extremely big, extremely strong, even just the theory of training shifts a little bit in terms of recovery and what are good decision making in terms of taking risks versus getting rewards, etc. So I'd like to get into the study. So I'm sure you saw my video on the study. So I guess what did I get wrong, and are there any sort of updates or addendums to the study and anything you might want to add there? Feel free to give me a good browbeating or tongue lashing. And I guess what is the state of the literature on bulking, and is bulking dead in the year 2023?
No, and we didn't even say it wasn't the paper, and that's kind of the funny thing. It's I have no problem with people taking shots at the science crowd based upon the findings and feeling like they don't match the real world, if they actually read the whole study and see if that was actually what was said. I'm not allowed to manipulate my data to make people's feelings feel better, but I absolutely can take a look at the data and then write about it in the discussion and say, hey, look at all the other data and here's where this fits in. But I think the problem really lies in how people understand science, or I should say misunderstand science, in that they expect a study to come out and for us just to accept it uncritically as truth. And then if that study doesn't fit our current understanding of the world, then there's something wrong with the study, or I need to completely change my worldview. And that's just not the way research ever has worked or is intended to work. And it is more like it's this kind of evolving cloud of various data points that we have to really look at holistically and then combine that with our anecdotal understandings of what we observe and our theoretical understandings of what we think we know but we haven't fully tested, and then make decisions based upon that. And being an evidence-based practitioner, not just a science-based practitioner, means that you equally weight and you understand the differences between individual differences and personal preferences, the actual science in the published literature, and then your experiences and anecdotal experiences of the collective community who does a thing, right? So first off, I want to say, I appreciate you doing the video. And overall, I think you got things right, and I agree with you on the actual practical recommendations. But I think the things if anyone does want to do a video on a study, the thing to make sure is that you get a hold of the final published full text and you read it in full before you do the video on it. And this is not necessarily your fault, because if you don't really understand the evolving nature as well, it's not been the same forever, of scientific publishing, you can potentially get like a preprint, which is what you were looking at, or you can potentially get a copy edited, like a pre-copy edited version that may not have the final peer review based upon what that publisher allows you to share. So you actually reviewed the preprint. Now, for those who don't know, a preprint is something that authors will put out before it's gone through peer review. And that means that it doesn't necessarily have that same level of rigor, and there might be still errors that we didn't catch that the peer reviewers did. And we actually did make a pretty substantial error. It didn't really matter, but which is why we didn't catch it. But we actually mislabeled the moderate and the higher surplus group, which kind of didn't matter because, like you noted in your video, they both gained the similar mean amount of body mass. But some of the group-based differences, like for example, the bench press, it favored the moderate group. It was actually,
that had me confused, and I was really trying to wrap my head around, how did this happen? How did having less of a surplus consistently increase their bench press? Because I'd always, thought it was the opposite. And so, looking at that data, because everyone in that, mislabeled moderate group had a better bench, and I was like, man, this is, what's going on here? And so, that makes perfect sense that they were just swapped.
Yeah, and Geoff, I would say even more importantly than that, and this was actually something where I am going to browbeat you a little bit, because we did talk about it, even in the abstract of the preprint, is we basically said, hey, we did not have a big enough sample size in any one of the groups for you to really look at the group comparisons. Like, we're going to report it because we did the study and we said a priori we're going to compare these groups. But because we didn't get enough big enough sample size because of COVID, what we're actually going to do is going to do a continuous analysis. So what the hell does that mean? So a group versus group comparison is what we're kind of used to in the evidence-based community. So if we see anything besides that, we just go, oh, brain, math, hard. And then we go, okay, what's the group versus group comparison? But the cool thing is, because in the real world, even when you have a dietitian like we did, giving weekly guidance and being on call to help these people follow either a small or a relatively large surplus, they're going to be all over the place. So everyone who is assigned a surplus got into a surplus, but on average, the moderate and the high group gained the same amount of weight. So the functional surplus was the same between groups. So it's not surprising to me that when we looked at everybody together, the folks who were at maintenance, the folks who are on an intended moderate surplus, or the folks who are on an intended large surplus, that bench press difference went away. And there was no relationship between the amount of weight gained and the and bench press. So the continuous analysis is, instead of looking at as three groups, we go, right, we have a range of different masses of body mass gained, and then we have a range of increases in 1RM bench, 1RM squat, tricep, bicep, and quadricep muscle thickness increases, and the most important and the largest finding, the sum of 8 skin fold thickness differences. So we should just look at that relationship, because it's much more statistical power. Now we have an N of 17, which actually did meet, a reasonable threshold of sample size for us to make some inferences about it. But we did not. We were like a quarter of the sample sizes we need. So basically, any of those group versus group comparisons, they could be very easily just what's called sampling variance. You get a group of 5 people who maybe haven't benched as much as the rest, or they have a really crappy bench press at home, and now they got our lab bench, and now they're making gains, right? Because that's just easy to happen in a random, chance distribution of participants across groups, and there's only 5 of them, right? So I think the largest error that you made, if I was to be harsh in your video, is just focusing on the group versus group comparisons. And I think that's an understandable thing to do. And like I said, you still got the whole thing right. So I'm not going to browbeat you too much. We'll leave it at that. But I think the correct interpretation of the strongest evidence in that study is that when we looked at the 1RM for both squat and bench, and when we looked at the changes in triceps and quadricep muscle thickness, there was no relationship between the amount of weight gained and those changes, which was surprising. And it was actually contrary to our hypothesis. So our hypothesis was that being in a surplus would help both muscle gains and 1RM strength gains, but there wouldn't be better to be in a larger surplus, which is something we can talk about in a bit, right? Just the surplus itself is important. It's better than maintenance, but how big that surplus is, at least in trained lifters, we didn't think it was going to matter. Now, and then what we thought would basically happen is the larger the surplus, the more fat mass gained. And that was our what we found. So we didn't use statistical significance testing, your traditional kind of stats like P is greater than, P less than 0.05, because that's not super useful in terms of giving people a more holistic understanding of the data. And it's more subject to errors. When you have a moderate sample size, if you use what's called a Bayesian framework, you can give estimates and odds ratios just comparing different likelihoods. So if you look at the odds ratios, which I can explain what that means relatively easily, there was a roughly like a 14 to 1 odds ratio in favor of gaining more weight, predicting more skin fold changes. So what does that mean? A way to think of that is if I was to take out of a hat any one of our 17 participants and they gain more weight than the rest of the group, there's a 14 to 1 odds chance that they would also gain more skin fold thicknesses, right? And that explained roughly 50% of the variance. So weight gain, what does that mean? Explains roughly half of the change in skin fold thicknesses, meaning that it's explaining a large proportion of it. Other changes and other things might have influenced the rest of it, genetics, dietary adherence, etc. But you would think that would also co-vary with weight change. So the strongest finding by far, which we had what we would categorize as strong evidence and a moderately large relationship between weight gain and skin fold thickness change. So that's the headline, is that in trained lifters, at least, over 8 weeks at least, when you're only training 3 days per week at least, if you were to gain a lot of weight, you're probably going to gain a lot of body fat, and it's going to have only a marginal impact on strength or hypertrophy. Now, we did actually find one other thing, and that was that there was also a relationship between bicep thickness increases and weight gain. But I think we just have to, let's compare the strength of those two findings. So we had an odds ratio of 14 to 1 for fat gain. We had an odds ratio of 1.4 to 1. So yeah, 1/10. Yeah, so it's 1/10. And it only explained 25% of the variance. So it's not that bulking doesn't work at all. It's that it's conditional, I think, is the best way to look at it.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is bigger biceps are really all that matter, though. So, I mean, 1.4, it's like, I mean, I'll take it. Like, if I have to put on an extra, 40 pounds of fat for an extra half an inch on my arms, that sounds like a pretty reasonable deal. So,
oh, and it's even better than that, Geoff, dude, because you're gonna get more inches on your arms from the fat gain. This is looking at ultrasound. Like, this is saying, hey, I actually gained some muscle too. This isn't just fat seps. So I mean, it's even better than you're painting it. No, but in all seriousness, there are some interesting things we got to discuss because of that finding. So it was what we categorized as weak evidence, only explaining a quarter of the variance in bicep thickness gains, and we had to go, well, why did that happen for the biceps but not the quads and the triceps? And if you look at the exercise selection and the frequency and the volume of the program, you can probably tease out why. They were doing 9 sets per week of quads only from squats, and these were done more strength-ish focused than hypertrophy. And they were short of failure, only squats, so that rec fem is not getting hit. Towards the end of the program, they were more in like the 4 to 6 rep range. And basically the same thing for the triceps. They were only really being trained by the bench press, so indirect. The biceps, on the other hand, however, they were getting direct work and indirect work, and they were getting 18 total sets split down the middle between rows and lat pull downs for indirect work and then actual bicep curls. So if we kind of look at not individual data, but group level data about what we know about volume, we've got our 2 meta-analyses from Schoenfeld and also Bas-Val that collectively are saying, hey, somewhere between 10 to 20 sets is where on average people tend to do best with the rate of hypertrophy. And that's right in there. And they also counted indirect and direct work together. And then we've got the more recent data on failure, which suggests, the closer you get to failure, the more stimulative the training is going to be on average, right? And indeed, all of our accessory work besides bench and squat, we had them trained to failure. So they were either hitting a self-described 10 RPE or they would actually get pushed to failure. And so it was a volitional failure definition, but we were heavily motivating them in their safe exercises. So unless the participant themselves held themselves back, most of the time they were pushing to failure. So I would say on average, it was probably like a 10 RPE with plenty of people hitting 11s and a few hitting 9s kind of deal. So the 18 sets mostly to failure and 18 sets compared to 9 for the other muscle groups. And more importantly than just seeing a relationship there also wasn't a significant change. I shouldn't say significant. There was no meaningful change when you look at the average change in the triceps or the chest. The tricep, the quadriceps. They were within like the technical error of measurement, but the biceps were not. Like we actually saw on average an increase in the biceps. So the biceps went up. Really, when you look at the whole group of 17 individuals collectively, they increased their 1RM in both the squat and bench, which makes sense because we had a pretty solid strength training program. And they increased their bicep thickness because they trained hard enough and did enough volume. And they were also gaining weight. Not all of them, but 2/3 of them roughly were. And those who gained weight seemed to be the ones who more consistently made those bicep gains, but definitely consistently were the ones who put on fat mass. So, what do we take from that? Probably if you're going to do a relatively aggressive bulking program, it needs to be supported by your training, which is exactly what you said, right? You need to make sure that if you're going to be trying to grow, like the primary stimulus is a good training program. And if you don't have an aggressive, effective, stimulative program, You can't force feed that process. I think this is something I've always said, is that nutrition is permissive to gains. So just like we see the folks who have a really awesome training program, but they're kind of in a perpetual state of cutting, or they're not eating enough, they tend to kind of fizzle. Same thing we see in people who have really shitty training paradigms, but just try to eat everything. They just have one of those fulking disasters, right? So I think that still holds true. But the other thing that holds true is we see a consistent pattern in the literature when we look at studies on weight gain, where the more trained you are, the more challenging it becomes to actually put on muscle mass quickly. So we kind of replicated the findings of Gartha and colleagues. That's a Norwegian last name. We always just say Garth as Americans. And we'll go with the American pronunciation. We'll say Garth and colleagues 2013. But they specifically had elite athletes. Now, these weren't necessarily elite resistance-trained athletes, but they performed strength conditioning exercises. And they had them go into either a nutritional counseling group where a registered dietitian put them into like a pretty large surplus, or they were kind of self-directed to grow. And they weren't bodybuilders, so they didn't eat more than the other group. They ate less. So there was actually a 600-calorie disparity between the elite athletes in the nutritional counseling group and the kind of self-guided muscle-gaining group. And they were doing basically a 4-day upper-lower split. So pretty effective training program, but they were also doing their sport-specific conditioning. So maybe concurrent effect, maybe a little too much, overall, maybe hard to recover. That could be a factor. But interestingly enough, what they found is that everybody was increasing their strength on their lifts and their muscle mass, but there was far more fat gain in the group that was doing the 600-calorie higher diet, and there were no significant differences between groups in strength or muscle mass performance. So really, they kind of just gained a lot more body fat without an advantage. So kind of the same thing we found. And their time frame, it was individualized for each person, depending on how much weight they were trying to gain for the ideal body weight. But I think on average, it was like 12 weeks. So when we're talking about 2 to 3 months of relatively aggressive bulking versus slower bulking, there may not be an advantage. And theoretically, it's also hard to figure out where does that advantage come from. Like, why would being in a 400-calorie surplus be better than a 100-calorie surplus? And I don't have a good reason for that, I can't justify that physiologically. I think, and I'll come back to this, the only thing I can say is that you need to make sure you probably are actually in a surplus if you want to get the benefit, and a smaller surplus, and that's something we wrote about in the paper. We said, hey, we gave these folks the guidance to be in a 5% surplus or a 15% surplus, but on average, they were all somewhere around a 10% surplus, right? So I think this is where the practical recommendation of understanding what is practically feasible for a person. And, I'm a competitive bodybuilder. I'm also a competitive bodybuilding coach. So when I ask someone who is like with that level of fine detail, they will be able to implement a smaller surplus because they have more nutritional knowledge and experience. But that may not be the case for your general population, like muscle building desiring clients. So I think this does change practice a little bit. Like the whole gain-taining approach may be fine if you have that level of experience, knowledge, and ability to have that tight control over your nutrition, and you know how to look at like a 14-day average of your body weight, et cetera, et cetera. But if you actually want to be sure that you're in a surplus, you may need to maybe put another 100 calories on that target and just accept the fat gains that come with it, because you might be risking not being in a surplus at all. And it's not that you can't make gains at maintenance. You can. But I think if we have any data, it suggests that being in a deficit of a reasonable size, or perhaps being in and out of maintenance or deficit, might hinder you a little bit. I don't think it's quite as bad as many people make it out to be, but we do have like mechanistic data on. There's actually a pretty cool meta-regression that came out, which is kind of like a continuous analysis of a bunch of studies. So it's kind of like the analysis we did in our study, but with a bunch of studies. And there's a meta-regression showing that once you're in a 500-calorie deficit on average, it kind of prevents you from making muscle gains. So I think that's interesting. And that means that there's probably this kind of this curvilinear relationship where it's like a 500-calorie deficit on average, again, not for everybody, it's preventing muscle mass gains. Of course, if you are like really high in body fat, probably not the case. And And then if you're in a 300 calorie deficit, you can make maybe marginal gains. If you're at maintenance, you're doing pretty good. And there's some point where a surplus is beneficial, but then it stops becoming beneficial. And what we talked about in our paper is that this is probably mediated by how much muscle is it reasonable for you to grow in any given period, which is probably related to how close are you to your ceiling, right? So really interesting study that is completely different than what Garth and colleagues found, and what we found is by Rosnick and colleagues. So what Rosnick and colleagues did was they took untrained male lifters and they got them lifting, and they gave them two-thirds of them, 2 out of these 3 groups, a 2,000 calorie per day weight gainer supplement. And right, so they just chuck 2,000 calories on top of whatever they're doing. All right. And in 8 weeks, these dudes gained around 7 pounds. So they're gaining like a pound a week on average, which makes sense, right? So, you would think they'd gain a little bit more than that, but I think we all know when you try to consume 2,000 calories on top of your normal diet, your NEAT's going to go up, and you're going to habitually eat a little bit less in your other meals, right? That's a lot. Now, here's the wild thing, though. 7 pounds, or just around 3 kilos in 7 weeks, on average, almost exclusively consisted of lean mass. So, yeah, if I showed those researchers or those participants our results, they'd be like, y'all guys are wussies, you just didn't do it right, like you're not training hard enough or whatever. But I think the reality is that most of us who came into the game not coming from a high body fat level and who came in with the guidance of you got to eat big to get big, we did experience the success of bulking. I did. I put on 20, 25 pounds in my first 6 months of training, and my body fat percentage didn't really change, which means I went from like 12% to 12%, but I gained 20 pounds. So I gained like 2 or 3 pounds of fat, and then, 15 pounds of muscle, and then 2 pounds of water or whatever it was. But I was like, yo, you got to eat big to get big. The problem is then I tried to repeat that like 3 or 4 times in my career, and each single time I did that, except for one, which I'll talk about in 2018, it was an epic failure. I put on almost exclusively body fat, and I felt like all I did was create an environment where I needed to diet. So I really only had one good trip to the well of bulking, and then all of my subsequent attempts were pretty poor. And the one time, which I'll talk about now, is a very advanced lifter. So we're talking 2018. I started lifting in 2004. I did a pretty big bulk. I got up to 98 kilos, which is pretty heavy for me because I was walking around 90, 91 competing in powerlifting for 3 or 4 or 5 years. And I was like, listen, I'm going to do a dedicated bodybuilding off season because I'm going to compete in 2019. Now, the thing is, though, is that when you look at the actual rate of weight gain that I did in 2018, it was really only about 1 kilo a month. So one, not that fast, right? Slower than what Rosnick did. And I did put on substantial body fat, but I also made some improvements. However, I had been competing in weightlifting and powerlifting to the point where I knew that certain muscle groups were a bit detrained for me. So we're talking calves, biceps, lats. And not bad, but like I'd say overall my physique was just starting to degrade a little bit from where it was when I was doing a lot more bodybuilding training. And this also was confounded by the fact that I was doing my PhD. Like if I was not doing a PhD, and this has been the case in the prior 3 years, because guess what? Power building is not an abomination. I was able to maintain and even make progress in my physique while also getting stronger, or vice versa, maintain my strength while making progress, on my physique. So I basically just put one on the back burner and focused on the other. But, that's a whole other conversation, and we can touch on that if you want. But I will say that at a very advanced level that the people who are talking about this aren't even at yet, there does become an optimization problem. Like right now, when I move into my first pro off season, I am going monogamous with bodybuilding. And I know because what I have to do to maintain strength is actually gets in the way a little bit of what I need to do to put on as much muscle as possible. And conversely, if I wanted to gain strength, now we're talking 10 hours of powerlifting training a week, it makes it very hard to do more than maintain my current size. So it once you're at 90, 95% of your genetic capacity in strength or size for bodybuilding, I do think it becomes challenging to improve in both simultaneously. But 99% of people don't even get to 80% of their potential. So it's kind of like it doesn't matter. So
Yeah, it's one of the things where, yeah, it's I threw out the number, I think 90 to 95% as well in my power building video. It's just such a non-issue for the vast majority of people. I mean, I think sometimes content creators don't realize how close to beginner status most people watching fitness YouTube videos are. And so for most people, if you want to get bigger, you're going to get stronger. And if you want to get stronger, you're going to get bigger. You know, it's just you can skew your training one way or the other a little bit, or a lot if you want, but like they're still very, very close. Those train tracks, I mean, they're parallel until quite a long time. You know, we're talking probably a decade. Like I'm not even there. Like if I want to get
agree.
stronger, I get bigger. If I want to get bigger, I get stronger. So, you know, and I'm maybe not as advanced. I'm not as advanced as you are, or some other guys creating content. Like I've only been at this only quote unquote only 9 years.
Yeah.
But I actually feel like that is only like also not in quotes because you know you see like guys like you, guys like Geoff Alberts, you know, who've been at this a solid few decades, and it really is a long game. Now, when it came to the training plan, I said it was a well-structured plan because of the emphasis on the biceps. Although it did it did fall short of the evidence-based 52 sets per week, you know, recommendation, which applies to all muscle groups all the time and not just specialization. So.
And not just for the last 2 weeks of the study either. For that's actually the whole 8 weeks. Yeah.
365, baby. 365. That's how we interpret everything. So, you know, I do think maybe with more volume, you know, bulking could make more sense. But yeah, I do think that training age, maybe biological age to a certain extent as well.
At a certain point, I would agree with that.
Yeah, like if someone's, you know, if a client comes to me and they're 45 years old or something, and they're like, yeah, I want to get big, I want to bulk. Even if their training age is low, I might be a little bit more conservative. But if someone's 18, 19 years old and they're skinny, I mean, I think, yeah, just seafood diet. That's when that recommendation I think is pretty strong. But as someone gets up in body fat percentage and closer to their, you know, potential, whatever that is, we'll get to that in a little bit. I think things have to slow down. You could make the argument that because it's harder to build muscle when you're more advanced, a surplus is even more needed. But I do think you have to be a little bit careful with it because even if the data might not show this, I think past a certain point, you might run into like just health issues, even for natural lifters, like high blood pressure. My blood pressure will be kind of borderline something I would want to keep an eye on, which is partly hereditary, but it's partly body weight mediated as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if you put on muscle and you're putting on fat and you're predisposed to some issues, you might not see it in your blood work immediately, but eventually, you know, if you're going up past 20% body fat, especially, I think that's where, you know, keeping an eye on things makes a lot of sense. And ultimately, we do this at least partly to be healthy. So I think if you're trying to like sneak in an extra pound of muscle that you might get from a big bulk, but now, you know, you're eating crappy foods because often bulking is an excuse to indulge, right? And, you know, in the Western world, usually, you know, a lack of food or lack of calories is not the biggest concern for most people. And it is driven by training. I mean, I tell people that all the time. Don't worry about like a small, like a tiny difference in surplus. You want to make sure that you're in a surplus, which might mean that, as you said, you might want to err on the side of slightly more surplus just to make sure that you're actually in one at all. But it has to be driven by the training. I mean, you could eat your face off, but if your training is not on point, I mean, your body's not going to adapt. It doesn't make sense, right? Why would your body adapt to more calories if you're not giving it the stimulus locally that is needed for adaptation? And so it's one of those things where the training has to be the main focus, and diet can help, and it can definitely hurt if you mess it up on a grand scale. But for most people, I would think they're high enough body fat percentage that they don't necessarily need to actively bulk.
By the way, GVS from the future here, and I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, I hate it when a conversation between two brothers in iron is disrupted or interrupted by completely irrelevant product placement. Well, that is where you're wrong, because this video is sponsored by Boostcamp. Now, one of the reasons why I chose Boostcamp for the sponsor of the channel is because Dr. Eric Helms is actually an advisor. Now, most of the emails that I get for sponsorships, they go exactly right where they belong, in the garbage. But I actually was very, very intrigued by Boostcamp. They've got a great product, they've got a great team, they put out great information, and they're doing things the right way. I myself have 2 programs up there with a 3rd in the works. And so if you're looking for a great way to track your progress as well as gain free access to some of the best programs out there on the internet, check Boostcamp out. I will leave a link in the description. And once again, thank you to Boostcamp for sponsoring this video.
So I want to get into, I guess, more of a general science discussion. What are some common strawmans of science, or maybe attacks that are not justified? Like, oh, they're all science nerds. And I've noticed my comment section has been fairly anti-science at times. And usually when the comment section of a YouTuber is a certain way, it's because the YouTuber is a certain way, and there's sort of like, reverberations that follow on from the videos. And certainly I've been critical of exercise science before. So I guess, what are some common and unjustified criticisms of exercise science? I try to always be fair, but what are some common things that you notice?
Yeah, well, actually, Geoff, I think some of those comments probably echo the collective growth that we're having as kind of an evidence-based community, which I would include you in. Like, even though you have been critical of the application of science, I think that's because it wasn't too long ago where we were science-based and not evidence-based, where there was too many people who were, and it wasn't the scientists themselves, but it was more people who were like really kind of fervent adherents to science. And they were like, listen, if this doesn't follow the meta-analysis, you're doing it wrong. And that's kind of a misunderstanding of the way to apply science. And I don't think there were enough voices among the scientific community kind of trying to correct that ship. Sometimes I felt like I was alone. Like I'm the only person going, hey, that's not the way the science stuff works. That's not fitting into the mold. Because all the other scientists were kind of focused on doing their science. And then we had a lot of science communicators who weren't necessarily scientists as well. And it's a very small Venn diagram of people who were scientists, were practitioners, were lifters themselves, and scientists. So, that has changed though. Like we've got Milo, we've got Pac, we've got me, you've got the old school heads who've been, down for a long time, like Alan, and others, like James Krieger, he actually just came to meet me out at WBF Worlds, and we were reminiscing how back in the day he did a men's physique show. Something people forget about that, about James Krieger. So he's got some board short, washboard abs pictures out there too, and he trains bodybuilders and shit like that. So I think that is one issue, is that science, the fitness industry in general, it looks for gurus, right? It looks for people or systems or things that say loudly and confidently, I'm the best, look at me, and here's the light and the truth. And then you follow that, you figure out it doesn't work for you, you get spit up and shoot out, and then you look for a better way of learning and knowing things. So often people will then find science-based content, but early on in that process, they basically replace the guru with science as a guru. And that is like philosophically anti-science, right? So now instead of going, whatever natural hypertrophy says, I'm going to do what he says, or whatever Greg Doucette says, I'm going to do what he says, or whatever Eric Helms says, I'm going to do what he says, or whatever Geoff Schofield says, I'm going to do what he says. Like, okay, no more guru. Now I'm just going to do whatever science says. And then if you tell me that the meta-analysis is at the top of the hierarchy, like whatever, okay, 10 plus sets, Schoenfeld et al. 2017, that means anyone who's doing 9 sets is an idiot. And I guess 100 sets is fine, but I'm not sure what 10 plus goes to. So there's this uncritical acceptance of science, right? And without understanding enough of the philosophy of science, I think that can be really misleading and even discouraging, and sometimes getting people to kind of look nihilistically towards science. And I want to say it was 2019. You reached out to me, or it might have been 2020, and you were like, "Hey man, I really appreciated that episode you did called "Science Doesn't Tell You what to do on Tuesday" or something like that." And I think, and you weren't alone in that realization, where I think the proper way to view scientific data is that it helps us update our beliefs on how we integrate our experiences with our knowledge and our understanding of principles. But it's something that is kind of this kind of like I said before, this evolving cloud that informs you. And you need a little bit of distance and time in the game to realize how science has actually positively influenced us. Because for me, when I started, I got, and this, I know this is one of your later questions, so we can address it now. I made a tremendous amount of gains when I went to being more quote unquote science-based in, say, 2008, 9. But that's because like what our baseline level of knowledge was 16 years ago was trash. You know, like I wouldn't eat carbs and fats together because I didn't want to store body fat. My bulking diets were way too big, and I kept going back to the well. No one was training a muscle group more frequently than twice per week, and that was considered high frequency. There was no, for strength even, like you would go to failure or you'd do max effort. You would basically only do west side. Like they had us tucking our elbows because, you know, the west side guys were the main powerlifters. There were no raw lifters, even though we were starting to come out in raw. They're telling us to focus on triceps and lats for our bench. So like the strength advice was basically, okay, if you're a super heavyweight enhanced multiply lifter, it's good information. Like I remember, you know, Dave Tate, who's doing a great job now, so I don't want to sound like this is a shot at Dave. This is like a 2005 article. It was like, hey, you know, if you're not adding size and adding strength, get a large pizza and dump olive oil all over it. That's what you got to do to get big. And I'm like, sick. Yeah, T-Nation. Exactly, you know. So, and there was a lot of other stuff. So like my training and my nutrition was absolutely held back by the fact that the amount of evidence-based information that was circulating into the mainstream was highly limited. The idea that there could be a YouTuber like a Jeremy Etier or Geoff Nippard with millions of followers whose entire content basis is let me take peer-reviewed researchers and talk to researchers and communicate to you, my head would have exploded. So I think it's like it's a good problem to have now that people are complaining about whether or not lengthened partials have enough studies behind them for us to adopt it, you know? Like that conversation would never even happened 15 years ago. Like some of the stuff that we consider bro science is often just outdated science. So I remember when I was first coming into the game, there was this big distrust of some of the science-based information because the nutrient timing data started to fall apart. You know, Alan Aragon's pointing out, like, hey, we don't actually have any studies measuring muscle growth showing that having a protein shake within 10 minutes after your workout is actually doing anything. It's all acute data. And this is circa 2000, like mid-2000s to 20-teens, so 10 years ago at least or earlier. And I remember there being an anti-intellectual, like, you know, flame up right then. But again, in the scientific community, that was something that was starting to become well-trod ground, and we're basing that off of data from the 90s. You know, so once something from the science gets embedded in like the bro culture, it is so much harder to bust that myth than it is to, you know, to create it in the first place. So all of these things, like, you know, higher meal frequency boosting your metabolism, that started with a scientific study that was misinterpreted. The ultra importance of protein timing or carbohydrate timing for lifting started in the peer-reviewed research. And while we correct those things in the scientific community, it doesn't change the messaging that well. But now it does, because the new things come out and the science-based folks jump on it. So, but now we have new problems, right? Now we have, are the people who are promoting an evidence-based approach, do they know how to interpret the research correctly? Are they checking with the researchers themselves before they put out their content? And is it reasonable to expect them to do so when they have to put it out frequently, and it's their paycheck and their reputation online and stuff like that? So, I mean, there's a whole industry around research reviews. Like, mass exists because of these problems and the disconnects between those communities, and I have a career because of it. So I think I'm glad that we have this new set of problems, Geoff, but it is kind of a brave new world in that now we have far more scientific information than we know what to do with. And people are still having just as much trouble as they used to engaging with the actual published data itself, which is still not written for the consumer. So we need some of these intermediaries. And then you have a broad kind of ability level and experience level with who's good at communicating that stuff. And I think it's great that people like you are making videos about research. And I would prefer this 100 times more than when no one would even ever read it. And the fact that you're open to me coming on and talking about it and saying, oh, you got this piece a little bit wrong, even though your overall message was good, we're in a great place. So I don't have a ton of sympathy for the people who are like super anti-intellectual now, because some of the things that they think is not science-based is work we did 10 years ago. Like, oh, you're comfortable knowing that you don't need to slam a post-workout shake and you just need to have 3 or 4 more protein meals. Oh, you're comfortable understanding that if it fits your macros is fine. You don't have to eat just a select list of foods. Oh, you're comfortable knowing that progressive overload is important for hypertrophy. Well, you know what? F you, because 10 years ago, nobody believed that shit, and they were going for the pump, the burn, the damage. You had to eat sweet potato. You had to eat sweet potatoes. You couldn't eat white potatoes. Why? I don't know, because brown bread is better than white bread, so therefore brown potatoes are better than white potatoes. Like, that was the level of knowledge we were dealing with. And it was our work and the work of the other people like you at that time who were trying to promote science or actually do science that got the people who are today thinking that the science-based shit is bullshit, but actually everything they're doing is what we fought for 10 years ago, who are complaining about it. So I think we have short memories, and we forget that many of the things that have become quote-unquote mainstream were cutting-edge evidence-based things 10 years ago. And if anyone sticks around in the lifting game long enough and keeps paying attention to the evidence-based space, they'll see this happen again and again and again. Because I've been lifting for 19 years, so I see it. So, yeah, I think that's what I would say is, one, science is not a guru. As soon as you start to enter the evidence-based community, you have to accept that it is a key piece that you adopt with everything else. And yes, you use it as your initial principles. You get an idea of where you need to be in the ballpark of what makes sense. But then everything after that is you take the scientific method. You go, right, I as a coach or as a self-coached person, I'm going to adopt what I think is reasonable, start in the ballpark, and then make adjustments to 1 or 2 variables at a time, and then see what works best for me. And I think you're a great example of being willing to try things that don't fit the mean response, but have worked really well for you, and you've seen this kind of second phase of progress. And that, I would say, is an inherently evidence-based thing. Like, you're no longer an intermediate. You're no longer a novice. And like we talked about before, the train tracks of strength and hypertrophy are identical, because if you do a cookie-cutter program when you're a novice, you're going to maximally gain strength and hypertrophy simultaneously. And even if you did specialize, you wouldn't be gaining any quicker. It doesn't matter. Like, just do something reasonable, right?
Yeah, even cardio, when you're a pure beginner, will put on some muscle. So yeah, it's there is this sort of trickle down thing where like science discovers this and then it's controversial and then people kind of accept it, but then they forget where it came from because now it's just a normal thing to do. Personally, I'm still on Team Tortilla. I just like the thinner skin that it produces. That's just my personal preference. Just going outside the mean,
Absolutely.
Have you noticed an increase in the misuse of science or science as like a branding tool or a marketing gimmick? Because I think that's where a lot of the pushback is. It's not actually against real, genuine science. It's against people who are science adjacent.
Yeah.
And you have people who claim to be science-based, like Geoff Nippard, but he's actually science-based. So it actually, that works out. But then, for every Geoff Nippard, there are several people who are, they chuck it in the title just as a way to get clicks, or they see an EMG study and suddenly, they have a top 5 side delt exercises, and there you go, like, end of story, because it has the bigger numbers, so it must be better, right?
Yeah.
So have you noticed this type of phenomenon? do you do anything to combat it, or is there any way to sort of avoid this, or is it just human nature to, I guess, leverage something good for the purpose of personal gain?
Yeah. So I would say there's been an absolute increase, but I wouldn't say there's been a relative increase. And this is something that goes all the way back to the beginning of the fitness industry. So Eugen Sandow, the father of modern bodybuilding, who built his career in the late 1800s, early 90s, he was the student of and often traveled with Professor Attila, who had the latest cutting edge techniques and would even use like, hey, this is science based stuff to sell like these squeeze dumbbells that Eugen Sandow absolutely did not use. He lifted like hundreds of pounds overhead, not these 5 pounds things. It's basically a grip device. Or Sandow's cocoa, which is supposedly a health elixir. So literally from the beginning of what we recognize as the modern bodybuilding era, science as marketing has been there. It's just that having it be in like the national newspaper versus having Instagram at your fingertips and having TikTok constantly makes it seem like it's far more inundated. But let's just go back to like the era we started out. You mentioned T Nation. I think that's a great example. Like half the content on T Nation was actually evidence based. The other half was science marketing.
Mixed bag for sure. I mean, I think up until maybe 5 years ago, I read every T Nation article. Like, I mean, every, like I hit sort by all, and I went through, the hundreds of pages of articles. And it's like you have some supplement ads disguised as, oh, there are some hyperlinks, which like no one clicks on, but they're there and they're reassuring, and people, some study somewhere who we don't know who was funded by. Oh, we do. It was by the company that's selling the supplement. Hey, it shows it's effective. Like it's put 10 pounds of muscle on you in a few weeks. Like great, fantastic. So yeah, definitely a mixed bag. Some gems for sure. Like I still follow Christian Thibodeau, who was involved with T Nation, and he puts out generally good stuff. But yeah, definitely a bit of a minefield at times. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think that has changed. It's just there's so many more voices, and it's so at a much higher speed. And there's always new entrants coming into the game who have to kind of learn to get a BS detector, right? So the approach I've always taken is, and this has changed a little bit, is I try not to play evidence-based whack-a-mole. Like there's entire careers you could make on smacking myths as they come up. And I do think it's an important service, but at the same time, if you spend all your time telling people what not to do, they don't really know what to do. So I've always been someone who tries to spend most of my time educating people on how to use science, that it's not what you do on Tuesday, but these principles that you get where you update your beliefs, and then to use the approach to chase individual response and differences and be able to assess real change. And, then things change gradually and you fit science into your evidence-based practice. And when interesting new studies come out and there's enough of them to where there's finally a meta-analysis and it leans one way, like you assess the strength of that finding, the consistency of it, and then maybe you try it. So like I've done extreme stretching protocols. I'm doing length and partials. I took citrulline malate for a while, but it took like multiple studies to come out before I did that. And the first thing I did was I isolated that variable and I experimented it on myself, and that's the same way I approach training clients. And I think when you've trained for, let's say, I was a personal trainer starting in 2005, and I still have a handful of clients, even though I'm primarily like a science advisor to 3DMJ. But I've probably taken a couple hundred people to stage, a couple hundred people to the platform, and I've probably like trained holistically as a personal trainer and an online coach like 500 people. Like what you focus on is detecting real changes in individuals, right? And I think that is what being an evidence-based practitioner is, not necessarily just staying up with the research. That's something you have to do to make sure that you have more tools to use in that scenario. But day-to-day basis, I get a report from a client. I'm not going to go back to them, hey, per Smith et al. 1998, I want you to, change your exercise selection so we can hit your vastus medialis because of the EMG data. No, that's not what I do. The day-to-day things, that's not where science fits into that. It's part of the practice, but that's not where it goes. So I think that is something people don't understand. And of course, science is sexy, science is marketable, and you have to be able to identify who are the charlatans, who are just the naive people who don't know how to interpret science, and it's kind of a guru for them, and they're not giving good information, but it's not purposeful, it's not malicious. And then who are the people at the various levels of accuracy in science communication. And if you know that they're better at interpreting science than you, then you need to make sure that you listen to what they say, but across multiple different, sources of information. So I think that's not easy, but it's better than the alternative. So I think what a lot of people, when you see this mistrust of science and the angry comments, is engaging with science-based information. The promise is that it'll avoid all of the charlatanry. It'll avoid you wasting money, having unrealistic expectations, and going down a pathway of not getting a lot of gains and being frustrated and disillusioned. And theoretically, that's true. But unfortunately, for that to be true, you have to be willing to learn a little bit about the philosophy of science. You have to be willing to critically engage with this data. You have to be willing to do that slightly harder work intellectually. And then there's a lot of people out there who are saying, but it's not that complicated. Just train hard and eat and you'll grow. And for the people who that works well for, that's great. But not everyone is necessarily as gifted as those content creators. And not everyone is necessarily, there's a lot of people who are dealt a really shitty hand, and, work harder is not, it often is the answer, but it's often not. If someone's been in the game for 5 or 6 years, and following the content on YouTube and like trying to read studies, getting frustrated, and then following somebody and buying their stuff, like they're typically not lacking effort. But they are struggling to figure out, how do I chase my own individual response, and what are the actual true principles? So that's kind of the way I present information, as I try to help people understand the hierarchy. Like, my books are all based upon making sense of the crazy amount of information that's out there, right? Illuminati. But like, that pyramid is far more important than the information in level 2 on page 16 or something like that. Just knowing, okay, if I focus on progressive overload, a sufficient amount of volume, an appropriate frequency, and a sufficient proximity to failure, and then I have enough energy and I eat enough protein, you'd be surprised how many other people get distracted and complicated by that. And that's where the mistrust of science comes from. It's that even in the evidence-based community, we've realized that we have to use clickbait marketing to get through, right? We have to play the algorithm game on YouTube to get views. So, there's this, I know, like Geoff, Omar, all these guys, Jeremy, they're thinking, I need to get this video to hit. So I got to have a sexy thumbnail. I got to have a good title. Now, I'll deliver on the information, but I need them to watch more than 5 minutes, right? I need them not to just react to the headline. And that's a challenging game. And if you don't play the game, you don't get seen, period, right? So it's not a simple problem to solve. And I think it is asking more than the average consumer wants to invest if they don't find that gains come easy with the basics. But the people whose gains don't come easy with the basics are the people who would benefit the most from fully understanding the evidence-based approach. And that's why I went to school. So the whole myth of like the nerdy pencil neck who doesn't even lift, the whole reason I got into science is because I wanted to get bigger. Like, I am the bro scientist who decided to get a degree, and I still am. Like, I would credit the fact that I actually have a pro card now with my pursuit of the intellectual, at least in part, intellectual pursuit of science. And I would credit, the success of a lot of my clients, at least in part of that. I am better for this pursuit. And there was times where I did get worse. Don't get me wrong. Like, I think in 2009, I was putting people on a pedestal. Like, anything Layne Norton said, even if I misinterpret it, I would do, or I would like believe in. And I remember like my peak week protocol in 2009 was consistently not working well for me in competition. But Layne Norton put it out there on the internet, and I just followed it. I did in 2007 as well. So that's an example of science as a guru. And if I had not thought critically or not advanced my own understanding of the philosophy of science, I would have been like, listen, Lane Norton, Mr. Science Guy, created the science-based peak week. It didn't work. This is stupid. I'm going to do what Jay Cutler says, right? And obviously that wouldn't have worked well either, because I'm not taking a boatload of anabolic steroids and I'm not 280 pounds on stage. And then I would have just gotten mad and been lost, but I'd abandoned the whole scientific approach, but I hadn't really abandoned it because I never really tried it in the first place because I didn't understand that science is not a guru. And here we are.
Yeah, no, it's one of those things where, as you said, the people who could benefit from science the most are the people who maybe are not as gifted, and it is just a mindset, really, just this experimentation, and it gives you this sort of these guardrails of, okay, well, this is roughly where I should be. It's like, this is where I should be. This is what I should do. It prevents you from messing things up too badly.
Yep.
And you might be even far, like, there's a chance maybe you'll go faster if you're on the other side of the guardrail, but that's pretty unlikely. You know, most people, just sort of by definition, are not outliers. And it is tougher being evidence-based. The next question was like, do you feel restricted being science-based? But I guess because, you know, you're evidence-based, it gives you sort of both sides, both perspectives. And I've noticed that most of the people who I follow for evidence-based recommendations on sort of the science side of things, they are people who actually lift as well. Because there are science guys who I don't think actually put it into practice. I've seen some guys who they post a lot of studies, but maybe their physiques don't reflect it. And to me, that it's one of those things where you don't have to be completely, you know, a mass monster to have credibility, right? But there is something that where I think people criticize that. They say, oh, like, oh, this guy doesn't even lift, like one of those science nerds. There are people like that who put out a lot of information, but maybe they haven't gone in there and they haven't actually gone through the process themselves. And I think for me, all the guys that I follow, they have both, right? Like they do, you know, keep up with literature. I'm subscribed to Mass. I wouldn't say that I'm evidence-based, but I am subscribed to Mass. I've been subscribed for a while. I do keep up with things, partly out of just interest, but partly it is useful, right? Like, you know, getting a second perspective or updating your opinion or getting sort of the finer details. Yeah, it is useful. But I decided not to go science-based. I actually filmed a video a while ago saying like why I'm not science-based. I didn't publish it because I think it was a little bit ranty, but it was just harder. It was just more difficult. Like I would start writing answers on Quora maybe 4 years ago, and they'd be all referenced with all the studies and stuff, and it would just take 5 times as long, 10 times as long than just like, hey, this is my experience, and just, you know, writing in a more personal way. And I also found, I guess, here's my question to you. Do you sometimes feel restricted being evidence-based? Like, do you feel like it, you know, maybe sometimes you want to share an anecdote and then people in the science-based community are like, where's the PubMed link, that kind of thing? Because I got some of those comments, you know, 4 years ago. And eventually I was like, you know, this doesn't really seem like a good fit for me, at least.
I don't, because I have no issue with labeling anecdote for what it is. I think most of the time the problem is that when people, like your general person giving advice in the fitness community, they're going to be like, yeah, I've seen this work for me. Like some of the issues I do have are like YouTubers who aren't even trainers. Like how long have you been a trainer for?
Let's see. In 2018, I started transitioning away, and it's tricky because I live in China and I'm on a marriage visa, so like I'm not technically supposed to work. Like you're not allowed to work on a marriage visa, right, which is wild. And so, you know, there were a few times where people snuck me into their gyms and I pretended to have just moved into the area and, you know, oh, I'm just checking out the gym. And then like I'm secretly training this guy, but like I can't make it look like I'm training him. So it's right, like we're working together and stuff just to, you know, be stealthy. So about 4 or 5 years. And yeah, I've seen people who blow up on TikTok or something and they've never actually worked with people.
Yeah, so like I take a huge issue. Let's I'll put it this way. Instead of my judgment of it, I'll just speak logically here. If you're someone who is speaking to anecdotes, it's not like all anecdotes are the same. Like when I go to S&C conference and there's a practitioner with a master's degree who never really went beyond that, did like the one study for their thesis, I'm not like, ugh, what the hell are you talking to this conference for? No, because like like the last 10 years, they've been working with multiple pro teams and they have like actual data. They're running statistical analyses on it. It's all observational, but it's the equivalent of like an observational study being published with hundreds of people. So is it causational? No, but like nothing is, right? So if you're someone who's like training in your dungeon and confidently stating things because it worked for you, I have literally no respect for you because that's not true. I it's ignorant, right? Like you don't have the ability to understand that your experience is not the normal experience and that there's 7 billion people on the planet, right? When a trainer is speaking to their anecdotes, and they're making claims that sound like it's, fact, I'm much more forgiving. I apply the principle of charity. I'm going, okay, this is what they've observed. And those are probably real observations if they've been doing this for a long time, so long as they're open-minded. Like you do get some, like if it's a dogmatic person, they have a system, then it's going to self-select, especially the more popular you get. So for example, one thing I became acutely aware of is the more popular 3DMJ got, the more people would come to us because of their perceptions of the way we train people, right? So they're already self-selecting. So if like you're a popular keto HIIT guy, people who have had success with keto and HIIT are going to come to you the more popular you get, and then you're going to have more success with them because of a belief that they have on their sides influencing their outcome, and probably some self-selection to where that actually might be better for those people on average, and then it artificially inflates your anecdotes and you're seeing more positive comments. Other people are just not following anymore because I had poor cholesterol and I didn't make gains and I gained body fat. Like I'm not going to follow you anymore. So they don't exist. So you're having this survivorship bias, coloring your own influencing, and you're no longer actually having observations. You're buying into your own hype that is being positively reinforced from false data. So I think something that's really important is making sure that the quality of the anecdotes makes sense. If you have someone who is a little more Jeet Kune Do, like Bruce Lee, be like water, like I have a bunch of different tools at my disposal, and I'm incredibly invested in figuring out what works for you. And when you look at the protocols of the people who follow me, they're different, It's not like everybody's just on a different version of my Boostcamp program. That's like if that's all someone's doing, is that no matter like who they are, they're just doing a cookie cutter that I apply to everyone. Like there's nothing wrong with having programs out there that would work for the average person, but if a good trainer is training people as individuals and then their anecdotes, incredibly valuable, So like when I'm very comfortable speaking of anecdotes and saying, hey, take what you will from this. And I see that as just something I integrate into that same cloud with the data. Now, I don't feel restricted by it because I spend a lot of time reading the data. I love it. And I've read studies people aren't even aware of, there's stuff going back to the 80s, stuff in the 90s. I've read every study that has the word bodybuilder in it that's ever been published, And I've read the full text. And I've had to hunt down librarians to get me stuff from, actual physical print manuals. So that's something I enjoy doing, but I've also been benefited from it. But there's a time cost. There's an investment cost. Not everyone has the opportunity or the know-how to do that. And I don't expect them to. So I think there's nothing wrong with leveraging anecdotes. The problem is when you then treat anecdotes like they're superior to scientific data without understanding, like, okay, no, you've got good observational data. But when if it's a large enough sample and we repeat that study multiple times and your anecdotes don't match up, we at least have to ask why. Like, what is different? And if you're not willing to do that, if you're not willing to ask why, or if you're not willing to accept that your findings are not generalizable, that's an issue. You have to at least say, well, look, the people I work with, they don't seem to respond like that. And there's probably some reason. Maybe everyone goes on the same type of diet, or everyone trains to failure. So you can't train them high frequency, or you can't train them with high volumes because you're already maxing out the intensity variable. or you make everybody squat and deadlift, so that doesn't work, or you only do machine, so you don't see the issue with pushing to failure. Of course, they're accurate at assessing it. So it's like, I think you have to have those critical thinking pieces in, but I absolutely think you shouldn't be pitting anecdotes against science. You should be pitting them as a form of evidence, and which in the category of observational data, you can have great disparity between, anecdotes. So like if someone says to me, well, this guy does this and he got great gains. Okay, what if I point out someone who does the opposite of that and gets great gains? Like, what, do they cancel each other out? We have to accept we live in a world where both are true. And I think that is something that a lot of people struggle with. So we can play like anecdote cards, And I think the only thing we really know about anecdotes is if they're consistently observed, whatever those observations are. The saying is success leaves clues, not success leaves answers. And there's a reason for that. The clues are that the people doing that consistently, that could be what's causing their success, but all we really know is that that's not a barrier to their success, right? It's not preventing them from achieving the results you've seen. And that is not saying that they're succeeding despite of it. I don't know that either, but we just have to know the limitations of the anecdotal data we have. And then when appropriate and when it's possible and when we actually can test it and we have enough time and resources, we can take those anecdotes that seem to be associated with success and we can test them in a laboratory setting. And the ones that seem to hold true in a controlled environment, now we've got a lot of support behind it. Like, hey, let's take bulking, for example, right? All right, people swear by bulking. They swear by doing this. Admittedly, a lot of them are on anabolic steroids, and this is a message that's trickled down from IFBB or guys like Dave Tate who don't care because they're super heavies, and being fatter actually helps them in their bench shirt and squat suit anyway, right? Okay, so these anecdotes, they're a little colored. Now, if we have someone who's got a lot of gains they can make, they're on anabolic steroids, or they're newbies or novices, or they've been on a shitty training program and they finally jump on like a good training program, or they've been like insta-fit, brainwashed, and they're always trying to stay shredded. And even though they've been lifting for 3 years, they've never actually gained the weight they should have in their newbie phase. All of those people are going to have the anecdotal experience of bulking is awesome. How dare you, Eric, publish a study that suggests it's not? But they're forgetting that my study included a number of competitive powerlifters, a number of competitive bodybuilders, and people who had a relatively high baseline level of training experience. And they're people who are open to trying a bulking study. So we've kind of excluded all the people who want to stay perma-shredded, right? Because they know they could get randomized to a large surplus group. So there are probably people, if they're trained and willing to do our study, who've already gone to the well and had their bulk. So the fact that they didn't get great gains is actually confirming a lot of other anecdotes that trained lifters will tell you. It's like, yeah, I just haven't been able to replicate my newbie gains again, or at least not to the same degree. I haven't been able to force feed gains. So yeah, that is true, and so is that Rosnick study, where the guys put on like a pound a week and it was all muscle, and they were just weight gainer in it every day. And you have to be able to hold those things true, connect them with the anecdotes, and then create a cohesive narrative that basically it's like a model. I can take all these data points that some even seem conflicting, and that can give me an understanding of what's really happening and the overall picture of the landscape. That's hard to do.
Usually the common knowledge is common for a reason. It's not random, right? Common knowledge is something that seemed to work for a lot of people. So I always question the study, but then I think it's also important to question the common knowledge, at least under some contexts, for some people. Because common knowledge, it's not absolute knowledge. It doesn't work for everyone. It's just sort of a general starting point. So yeah, bulking is not going to be for everyone. And it is under some contexts, like you said, where some people could really benefit from it. But at a certain point, I think maybe you get two bulks. That's what I've noticed. You get your newbie gains, and then you get lost for a few years, power building or whatever, and then you you sort of rediscover it for a second bulk, and the second bulk is usually smaller than the first, but more meaningful in some ways, because now you're getting closer to whatever that peak is, and those gains closer to your peak matter more because they're more rare. I guess they're more unique. They make you that special snowflake, etc. So I guess
I would agree with that. That's like I figured out my own ideal variables for training, or something a lot closer to it, bulk. Like you've done your
Which takes
cookie
about,
cutter bulk, which works for everybody.
yeah.
And then you've done the I've figured out me bulk, which is not as good, but it's noticeably better than you trying to bulk again on your cookie cutter. No, I would agree with that. That was my experience.
Yeah, no, I think that ties everything in pretty well together because, it's most people drift around as an intermediate for a little bit. And I think that's almost necessary. It's
Mhm.
super rare that I see someone absolutely nail every single year and then boom, now they're advanced in that theoretical maybe 4 or 5 years that you could get there if you really. Occasionally I see it. I've seen some absolute monsters who have been training. I'm like, so you've been at this a decade? And they're like, 3 years. I'm like, what the? Okay. What did you do? And they either got lucky or maybe they were just very gifted, and so a greater breadth of things worked. I actually saw a podcast with Kaz Hansen of N1, where he said, yeah, the more gifted you are, the less your exercise selection matters because you're
Yep.
just so sensitive to training that just everything gets hit. So, some guys are just like, pull-ups. So what do you do for your back? Pull-ups. Anything? Nope, pull-ups, just everything. Pull, like their joints are fine with just using one grip on pull-ups forever. That's their only, and it just hits everything because maybe they're just sensitive. I find I need more volume. I need more specific training.
Same.
I need closer to failure, especially with parts of the body. Like I know you mentioned upper body needs more volume than lower body for you. And I'm the same way. Like I think my back MRV, my gears host term is like 40, 50. Like it's a lot. It's annoyingly high amount and it's all to failure or even beyond failure. But that's just one area where I'm sort of outside of the guardrails, or maybe the guardrails as we know them are just maybe wrong based on common knowledge. Maybe actually we can handle more volume in some areas than we actually previously thought.
Well, we've only got data on like quads, triceps, biceps, and some on pecs, and to give Kasim even some more credit, he's talked about this a good bit, like the curves of where the tension is for back work and our mind muscle connection with them. It's the biomechanics are not on our side, right? So, and we don't have any data on it, right? So we don't have studies on lat hypertrophy, and we also have a collection of variables that are about how do I grow, like my pushing musculature in my quads that are placing, all the exercises at least, place tension at a long muscle length. So it's kind of these reasonable, moderate to low volumes. So I don't think it's that weird that a guy like you or me is, and many people have noticed, like, oh, like my back is holding me back, no pun intended, and I'm doing massively high volumes. Oh, the science is wrong. It's like, well, the science doesn't exist on that. The science isn't wrong. We're just maybe applying it outside of the context at which it can be applied.
Yeah, I've noticed that back is often the last area that sort of fills out. Oh, it's cat. Oh, back is often the last area that sort of fills out for a lot of competitors. Like I think legs are often, they develop proportionately earlier compared to back because you go in, you squat hard, or maybe you do some leg press, these typical plans, and like you get good results. But
Yep.
for back, yeah, I think a lot of people, they just need more, and maybe they need to go closer to failure or beyond failure. You see cheat rows, and those were a staple for a long time for a lot of people for a reason, because cheating is very instinctive for those movements, because you can do a super strict sort of Israel style row, and obviously he's gotten fantastic results from that. His back is ridiculous. Especially his spinal erectors. That doesn't even make sense. But actually, maybe that makes sense because he's just spending all that time bent over, and so maybe the erector is a limiting factor.
And he also had a powerlifting background.
And there you go. Yeah.
But powerbuilding's an abomination.
Yeah. No, it's clearly suboptimal. But yeah, I found that getting a little bit of oomph involved with the back training, but then still controlling it, because injury will slow your progress more than anything. But still controlling it, I found that to be very useful. So I guess considering you've been lifting for, you've had this, couple decades or so, What practical strategies or individualized approaches are you going to be using, now that you're a
Yeah.
professional natural body, in
Yeah.
order to keep making progress?
Well, basically, I'm trying to have that we just established doesn't exist. The third gaining phase where I make a substantial change to my physique. But actually, no. This is informed by my coaching experience. Is that when I have noticed improvements at the pro level, at the high level in bodybuilders, it's a refinement that's targeted. And this is something where I think it is very much a competitor's mindset rather than just like an advanced lifter's mindset. Is you actually need to look at specific poses and go, what is holding me back in that pose? And then let me run a specialization focus on that, see if I can bring it up. And that's what I did from 2019 to 2023. I was like, all right, why is my front relaxed and my front lat spread and my frontal bicep, like, why are those weak shots for me? What is it about my physique that makes the criteria that I'm trying to hit up against the other, maybe more genetically gifted athletes? Why am I losing points here? And I was like, well, I don't have enough like V-taper. So, all right, if I had my delts a little more capped and if I had a little more lats in the front, that would really help. Because I can't change my clavicle width. I can't change the size of my rib cage. So I did a full year of specializing and doing a lot of volume and a lot of lengthened work and, changing the exercise selection. Like you mentioned cheat rows. I think that's almost kind of like the caveman version of doing the lengthened work, because you can use heavier weights. So there's a little more tension at lengthened position. And then the cheat doesn't come until you're halfway up, right? And it starts to get hard. So you're actually cheating where it doesn't matter. You're in a more lengthened position, you're in a shortened position. So I think it's a less elegant, probably more injurious, a little more risky way of doing it. And that's where actually science can come in. Like, oh, actually we understand why that worked, and now we can refine it even better. It's not just that fucking cheat rows are awesome, bro. Look at Ronnie and Yates. That's not a sufficient explanation. Why? Oh, higher loads in the lengthened position, greater growth. And now we can actually make better decisions. So instead of loading up, 70% of your deadlift max and heaving it around uncontrolled, not great idea. Maybe we just put more weight on a lat pull down and just do the first half of the motion. Seems like a better idea, right? It's kind of like, do I want to get into my house by breaking the window and jumping in, or do I want to get my key out and open the door? Both will get you in the house, but maybe go with science and use your key, or you're going to be repairing that window a lot. So anyway, that's a connection to why science is useful and how it actually connects to anecdotes in a synergistic manner. But also it tells you what I'm going to be doing this season. And I've actually got a off-season vlog coming out on the 3DMJ channel where I've got all 4 of the coaches. They're recording videos of my game footage at me at Worlds next to these other 8 ridiculous middleweights who I placed 7th out of 9th in. So I'm actually in the mix, but like, how do we make me an unlikely pro champ? How do I get in the top 5 at Worlds? How do I get me one of them medals, my friend? And they're going to be looking at me in all the different poses and saying, all right, here's where we could have potentially moved up a placing, or we can make you more competitive. And then I'm going to create a specialization cycle based upon that. Because the facts are what they are. I'm probably not going to put on like 5 kilos of muscle mass, but I might be able to put on 100 grams on a muscle group here and there that will substantially change the way my physique looks, even if like my stats or my stage weight only marginally change. And we've already got some things that I've identified, like my glutes and my mid-back aren't what they used to be. And I actually think this goes all the way back to when I got hip surgery in 2017. See, powerlifting's an abomination. And I noticed, and my wife confirmed this, and this is the way I really know it's true, because if there's anybody who knows my butt, it's my wife. And read into that as much as you want. Hashtag butt play. I'm just kidding. But like my glutes used to be fuller and larger, and now I notice that my glute striations don't stand out as prominently, even though I'm just as lean or leaner. And I think, so I need to do some like actual targeted posterior chain work, and not just more squats and deadlifts, because I've obviously done powerlifting and that hasn't actually been the solution there, because power building's an abomination. But like specific mid-back rowing, more targeted like partial dumbbell RDLs, and like going to failure, because it's really hard to go to failure safely with like a barbell, but with dumbbells you can like drop one and you can keep going. So I've been experimenting with some stuff to try to hit those weak points, and those are just a few of the things that I've noticed. Like I've got one of the videos back from the coaches. Brad was saying like my t-shirt muscles, like arms and delts, and I don't do a lot of direct arm work because I get elbow tendonitis. So I'm figuring out ways. Okay, well maybe I got a little bit more juice left there. So it's more about these targeted, pose specific specialization cycles, and I'm more concerned with like the visual change in certain muscle groups now at this advanced level that maybe will add up to some kind of change quantitatively in my scale weight, but I don't expect them to. But I do think I will look different, and that's just a very different mindset than you have when it's like, oh, I want to see if I can do another bulk and gain 5 pounds, because I don't have the luxury of being able to go to that well and fail. Because if I have to gain 10 pounds and I find out that it was fruitless, that's just another 3 months of dieting that I have to do, where I might be, pissing away some of my gains anyway. So I have to be very cautious. So I have like a conservative bulk. I'm probably not going to be getting heavier than say 190, and I compete at like 175. So there's no bulk in my future, because 190 I'm going to look like like 190 when you compete at 175 is still really lean for what it looks like for the average person, for someone my height. That's when people start asking if you're dieting for a show. So that's the peak of my off season, so that I can be in a good position to not have a brutal diet, and hopefully that's not too lean to where I'm actually compromising my ability to put on muscle mass. So it's very much walking a knife edge, but fortunately I have 19 years of experience and a ton of just ingrained habits that support that. So that's going to be the plan, and we'll do that until 2025.
Okay, so you're competing in wow, so fairly soon. I think a lot of guys, they take sort of 3-4 years or even more between shows. But yeah, if you're planning on competing again relatively soon, yeah.
I would like to take a little bit longer, like 2026, but I would have to get an exemption. The current rules are you got to compete every 2 years to keep your pro card in the WNBF. I'm hoping that rule changes and they do allow for extenuating life circumstances, but I just don't have a good excuse to pretend that I couldn't just compete in 2025. So I am going to be trying to work on, because I'm involved in, like I said, some of the federations, and be like, do we really want this rule? Is this conducive? Like, do we want first-time pros to only get a year and a half to build a pro physique? I think even in the IFBB, you typically see people take some time off before they do their pro debut, a couple of years, even with assistants, right? So, yeah.
One of the criticisms of natural bodybuilding is that the standards of conditioning, which matter a lot, your conditioning is incredibly central to how you place. If you're not, if you're a couple of body fat percentage too high, that's like first to last probably, because at that level, when you're that lean, you can see every quarter pound of fat on you. So
Yep.
that's one of the biggest criticisms of the current state of natural bodybuilding, is that maybe it's too difficult or too arduous to get down there, and maybe it's not as conducive to long-term progress, or maybe it's not as, I guess, appealing to the average person. But then again, most sports are not appealing to the average person. Like, most people don't do professional sports because they're
No.
professional by definition. So
Yeah, like play touch football. Like don't get a TBI. Go to the track and drive your car at like 100 miles per hour. Don't get into NASCAR and burn. I honestly think that we just as adults need to understand that when you start competing in something, there are going to be some concessions, right? And we all, as adults, need to have informed consent and draw our line in the sand with where we want that to be. And if natural bodybuilding is asking you to be way too lean, that you don't want to have to deal with those negative aspects of it, either don't compete, or maybe you could consider like the men's physique division, or you can compete in an organization where they have classic and it doesn't require you to be quite as lean. But I do draw the line somewhere. I'm not taking boatloads of anabolic steroids and trying to get my IFBB pro card. So that works for me, but I don't I think that competitive natural bodybuilding, it isn't just not for everyone, it's for almost no one, right? So like Like, here's something that surprised us at 3DMJ. We polled our audience, and like we are very obviously about competitive natural bodybuilding. So, well, let me ask you, Geoff, what percentage of our audience do you think competes or aspires to compete?
Um, 20%,
Pretty close.
30%.
Yeah, exactly. You nailed it, dude. About 70% of our audience are non-competitors with no plans to compete. And that's with us intentionally putting out primarily information for competitors, right? So I think that that tells you something. Like, we have a lot of people who are fans and interested and see that there's, wisdom to be gained from us and things like that, and useful information. And 30% of our audience being competitors is not a small amount, but it is not. It's a barely a plurality. Like, it's a sizable minority of our audience. So yeah, I think natural bodybuilding is really cool if you like weird science, art, and sport all contained together. But I like weird science, sport, art is gonna be really hard, and it's gonna be pushing things to extreme, or it wouldn't be that in the first place. And also, from a judging perspective, it's really hard to put the genie back in the bottle. Like, you can have someone who has an awesome Silver Age physique, like 1940s level of conditioning, and they're going to look beautiful. But when you actually put them next to someone who's shredded, you don't even look at them. Like, you can't. Your eye will be drawn to, like, holy shit, that guy looks like he's made out of like rubber, and I can see his veins. And he looks bigger, he looks leaner, he looks better. Your brain will immediately start to calibrate to that, and that's why it's been very challenging to put the genie back in the bottle on the enhanced bodybuilding side. Like, the only way they've been able to do it is to create another division with height and weight limits, and I just don't see that happening in natural bodybuilding. I would say, though, there's only so lean you can get, and that is our freak factor, and I don't think it's going to change much. Like, right now, I'd say for the past maybe 8 years in natural bodybuilding, we've just seen the conditioning standard rise, and that's kind of capped, because with anabolics, that is also kind of capped. We're seeing people 300 pounds on stage, but like, since Ronnie, no one's really getting bigger. And I don't think since, like Brian Whitaker, in 2015, I don't think we're seeing anybody getting leaner, because there's just no body fat left, right? So this is what it is, and I think you kind of have to accept it. And there may be some more divisions, there may be some changes, but the only way it's been able to get curtailed in the women's division is by throwing in, like fit body, bodybuilding, physique, and bikini. And there's downsides to that too. Some people feel like that it's almost killed the female bodybuilding division. That's starting to get a resurgence, but that used to be that people would compete in, like, when I got in the sport, dude, the figure division had just started. And it was like the fitness division had died, where you actually do the athletic routine. It was men's bodybuilding, women's bodybuilding, and this new funky thing called figure, which we're not sure if it belongs. And now, like, figure's muscular as hell, because that's what things slide to. And then there's bikini, right? So yeah, it's hard, and I can understand. Like, you don't have to like natural bodybuilding. You don't even have to think it's healthy, because it's not. It's just cyclically unhealthy, broadly overall healthy. You got people competing in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and they're healthy for it. I mean, it's basically just long-term intermittent fasting for, like, seasonal things. Maybe it's even expanding our longevity. Hashtag autophagy. But I think for the most part, it is, if you want to have, like, the purest elements of physical culture, and you want to have health, strength, which, by the way, to say power building is an abomination is basically to say that physical culture is an abomination, because it's always been about strength, health, and aesthetics, all is the same thing. That's the only pure ideology, if you want to go back to it historically, is to say that form follows function. The Grecian ideal was about both simultaneously. And considering physiologically you can't even separate them, like, if you get a larger muscle, you get stronger. To call them separate ideologies is to be ignorant of both science and history. You can edit that out. But or you can keep it in if you want to throw some shade. I'm sure he'll comment about me. But the point is that, like, if you want to have that kind of physical culture ideal, you have to remove the competitive element. And I think that's totally fine. And I consider non-competitive bodybuilders my brethren and sistren just as much as the competitors. But if you have a competitive drive and you want to, be the man or the woman in the arena, then you kind of have to accept the rules of the arena.
Sure. Yeah, I've heard several stories of especially on the female side where they have so many divisions now where they competed in one show and they're like, we want you leaner. And then they dieted. And then the next show they're like, we think you're a little bit too lean. And so like it's the criteria are clearly described, but it seems like every judge maybe has their own interpretation. And I would not want to compete as a female in some of these divisions just because, man, like it just must be difficult. Because at least in bodybuilding, you want to be bigger, you want to be leaner. Okay, at least it's clear, right? If you're bigger, good. If you're leaner, good. But some of these female, I mean, it's just, oh man, like it's this target and it's probably moving around a little bit from show to show and judge to judge. And then, so you're trying to hit something, you don't know exactly where it is. And man, that would frustrate the hell out of me. But yeah, at least with bodybuilding, those two things are kind of in opposite roads because as you get leaner, well, you're not going to be getting any bigger past a certain point, under 10%.
But you look bigger.
But at least the definition is fairly clear. So where can people find more about you? I've been a Team 3DMG, 3DMJ subscriber for a long time now, and even though I don't have any plans on competing, I have definitely garnered a lot of golden nuggets from there. Watching you train, watching Berto train, all the guys, Geoff Alberts, his vlogs, like balancing family and training. Brad Loomis, and the podcast in general. So that's an incredible resource. So I guess where can more people find more information about you and yeah.
Dude, it's an honor to hear you say that, and I appreciate the work you do. And we need more voices from non-competitors because it is a little different. Like I appreciate like what you and Dave McConey do. I was mentioning that on the recent podcast we just released, that it's good that it's not all just competitors because we have kind of a skewed perspective. It's a unique perspective based on everything we just said. So, yeah, man, if you're a science hater and you just want to see people in the trenches, 3dmusclejourney.com, and then just ignore everything I put out or that Brian puts out and focus on the rest of the team who's not so blatantly science pandering to your face. And if you're on the other side of the fence and you love the science, well, shit, muscleandstrengthpyramids.com, massresearchreview.com, you get your citations on. And then just ignore all the stuff where we don't talk about, Smith et al. 1998. So, no, but in all seriousness, I appreciate that. This is an awesome long conversation. I'm sure it's going to get edited into multiple videos based on the fact that we've been talking for 2 hours, but it's been a pleasure. Thank you for promoting the research. And like I said, you got everything materially right. And I think it'll be really instructive to your audience to be able to hear from the people who actually conducted it, like how to interpret it and why it's not easy to get the information out there. So yeah, 3dmusclejourney.com and my own personal Instagram at Helms3DMJ. We got all the stuff that I do like this that I advertise on there if you want to see what I'm doing. So yeah, man, keep doing the good work and thanks for the collab.